Nathan, can you check your microphone?
Check. How's that sound?
Sounds good. Smooth. I think we're on time to start right about now. I'm going to wait and just kind of vamp and talk a little bit while I get people's attention to maybe join us here. Or perhaps you want to go upstairs with Danny and Tim. They're doing a learning by doing in the loft. If you haven't been up to the loft, it's just right up these stairs on your left, on my right. Danny and Tim will be learning by doing. There's this word here, pedagogy, orange peel pedagogy, learning by doing. That is in the loft. Right on, Tim. But down here, I am joined by two friends. I think we can say we're friends. We've DM'd a little bit.
Let's do it, yeah.
On my left, I have Nathan Long. On my right, I have Travis West.
Yo.
I'm Gary Krause, and I'm going to let Nathan do a little intro of himself before we kick off this conversation about teaching privacy and security, which is a hot topic in Bitcoin for sure.
All right, well, Nate Long. I've been in cybersecurity since 1998, and spent the last 6 years focused on being a cybersecurity evangelist at a large healthcare organization in Idaho. So that exposed me to 17,000 people. It really kind of radicalized me because on the one hand, I got the opportunity to try to teach cybersecurity to high schoolers. At the same time, I'm interacting with folks who are cleaning rooms in the hospital but might know 5 or 6 languages. Got the opportunity to interact with folks who were doctors in Iraq and yet were doing more menial tasks here and working with them on trying to be cyber secure and to practice privacy, and then at the same time with CISOs and CIOs and providers where you have to speak jargon to convince them that you know what you're talking about. So, They all needed help.
Yeah, we all need help. One of the topics I'll hit on is it's a journey, right? But let's kick it over to Travis. Travis, where are you coming from? Tell us about yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Travis West. As you can tell from these glasses, I used to be in law enforcement. I used to be in law enforcement, and I was a detective for a number of years. I worked major crimes and then like cybercrime cases, so a lot of fraud, financial crimes, scam cases, a lot of blockchain analysis, cell phone tracing, that kind of stuff. So that was my background. Now I work in Swan, and that's me.
Awesome. I'm Gary Krause. I spent 11 years, 4 months, and 3 days in the U.S. Navy. I was a Chinese linguist, did signals intelligence background, so a lot of wireless exploitation and protocols and such. And then 2019, got out, went into the tech space, spent some time in big tech, spent some time at a startup. And then most recently, before I started my current gig at Marathon, which is a mining company as an engineer, I was at a cybersecurity contracting company doing basically cybersecurity infrastructure. That's my background a lot, is the infrastructure. The things that if it breaks, then everybody's upset, but if it works, nobody cares because you just expect it to work. So that's a little bit about my background, and yeah, now I'm here to talk about teaching privacy and security, and ideally we talk about this in the context of Bitcoin. So let's kick this off with, Nate, why is privacy and security important to Bitcoin, and where do you begin with teaching?
Well, why is it important? It's I don't think you could say it any better than what the last guy, Arnold, did when he's like, Bitcoin is really about teaching self-reliance, or I've begun talking about it as contemporary competence. My grandfather retired as the director of a massive trust, and yet what he did on his off days was come teach me how to be a carpenter. And I don't even come close to matching up to his skills. Most of us have forgotten those. My wife was given a sewing machine when we got married. We threw it away. She doesn't know how to can. I'm not sure if I could start a fire if it was, raining outside. But we've also, and perhaps more importantly, not begun adopting what are the requisite competencies of the digital age we already inhabit. And so what I'm about is trying to get people to recognize, let me give you a quintessential example. if we fail to practice cybersecurity at the hospital, you could potentially be down for 30, 45 days. You can be in situations where, for example, I was speaking with a nurse who approached a chemo patient and said, do you know your chemotherapy cocktail because we no longer have access to it? So I'm going and trying to talk to a ER doc about what he needs to do to make sure that we don't get caught by ransomware. Meanwhile, he's getting a phone call saying the patient that attempted to OD this morning needs X or Y. How do I grab his attention, right? And privacy and security are this constant thing, but we all need to be practicing. It's being eroded away from us on a constant basis, and yet we all have these other tasks that we need to become experts in. And so I'm really wanting us to say this is like hygiene. In the same way that you don't walk out the door without brushing your teeth, you shouldn't use the same password more than once. And if you haven't adopted that type of habitual thing, then you're not ready to have your own money as your own bank. So let's take, for example, a friend of mine who just retired. She's one of the most careful individuals I've ever met. Matter of fact, I go to people on a day-to-day, weekly basis, and I'm saying, let's instill these habits in your life. I go to her and she's like, well, here's how I do it, Nate. And she'll show it to me. I'll analyze it and be like, whoa, okay, yeah, that's solid, it works. I couldn't convince anybody besides you to do it because it's so intense, right? But that's fantastic. She retired, took a year to live on her retirement income just to test whether she was really ready for that budget. That's the kind of intentionality I'm talking about. But the nest egg that she's built up at some point is going to be insufficient because of the transition away from the US dollar to Bitcoin, right? And meanwhile, she's not taking any steps in that direction because of her appropriate reluctance to explore something she doesn't understand. So that's really what I'm passionate about, is how do we get this normalized privacy into the life of everybody?
Awesome. Yeah. Travis, what about you? Where do you start with privacy and security, teaching it, and why is it important in Bitcoin or otherwise?
So if you're like me, you're interested in like toppling central banking, right? And you're trying to encourage people to take self-custody, be your own bank. Well, right now, fiat banking, central banking is very fragile, and there's safety nets along the way. And we're all used to it. Like if you live in America, you probably have a checking account, and they have their own cybersecurity teams, right? If their stuff gets compromised, or if your stuff gets compromised, your online banking account gets compromised, and you lose money, there's probably a safety net for you. Like you're probably getting compensated again, I'm just guessing. There's, beyond like a username and a password, that's probably all you're used to dealing with. And you're used to any funds being moved being reversible, right? ACH returns, wire recalls, stuff like that. If there's a fraudulent charge on your credit card, you can contest it. And there's even on PayPal and Venmo and Cash App, you can contest all this stuff. But then if you're orange pilling people successfully, and you're transitioning these folks into the world of permissionless ledgers that are distributed around the world, where if that transaction gets confirmed enough, there's no takebacks, there's no customer service. You are your own bank now. So you need to consider what you're setting them up for. So if they need to handle their own cybersecurity now. They're no longer, they're not keeping their gold in the bank and having a custodian secure it. Now you're securing your gold, right? Your digital gold, and you need to think about the security aspects. It would be a shame to put all this work into like orange pilling your grandma, and then she goes and like Google searches a wallet, and it's like a scam wallet, and she loses her life savings, right? So you need to prep them for security. That's what I think of when I think of security. Like, if you're going to be your own bank, that means you are your own security. You need to be aware of scams, including scam and security best practices in your training, in your orange pill journey. And then we can talk a little bit later about privacy, I'm thinking.
Yeah, sure, fantastic. I see it. We've heard some examples here of like the severity of security and privacy, especially in the context of Bitcoin and self-custodying your Bitcoin and just in general. But one thing to understand, as with everything, it's a journey, right? You don't start by just going to run a marathon. You want to do a 5K and then a 10K and then a half marathon, right? There are steps to this. There are layers to this, as with many other things, right? You can go surface deep on a lot of things, but you can build on that by going surface deep, a little more under the surface, a little more under the surface. In layers itself, as in the physical world, in the digital world, security and privacy are also layers, right? There are trade-offs to be made with different decisions that you make. Understanding what those trade-offs are, I think, is one of the biggest starting points for individuals, because a lot of people don't understand. Your advertising identifier for you, because you like cats and Bitcoin and guns, right? Because you're a veteran. That's identifying to you. It's also identifying to Mike, but it's identifying to you in so much that these advertisers, these data, they're selling to the highest bidder, right? So, and that's just removing privacy, which can lead to security issues, right? If you are a known entity, if somebody can go buy some advertising data because they are looking for people that like guns and cats, well, you're now on that list, right? So privacy becomes a thing. And I think knowing what you're exposing and making an informed decision is sort of the starting point. And in the Cypherpunk Manifesto, it defines privacy as the ability to selectively reveal yourself, right? That's also security, especially if you're on like the battle space or whatever, right? Like if you're exposing yourself, if you're revealing something about your underlying situation, that could be a potential security. That's an attack vector. So having privacy by default, having the default to be not revealing more than what is needed for whatever you're accomplishing online. Like Facebook doesn't need to know that I like guns and cats for me to post about Bitcoin all day on Facebook, right?
Should you be posting about Bitcoin on Facebook? That's a whole nother question.
Right, 100%. That's a fantastic point. The more public Bitcoiner you are, the more you need to be aware of these things because, numbers go up is going to happen, opportunistic crimes is going to happen, and ideally we never have a case where Travis has to come figure out where my Bitcoin went because I got hit with a wrench for being a public Bitcoiner.
Yeah, so if you're a public Bitcoin asset, resource, like you care about your community, advertising that you're a Bitcoiner, they're going to assume you have Bitcoin, so that means you need to worry about your physical security, which is another thing. But arm yourself, boys.
But it's the same concepts, right? The physical world and the digital world, we're humans, right? So our brains work generally the same way, and the way we've structured we've modeled the digital world in many of the same ways that we've modeled the physical world, right? When you go to a bank, there's a secure door, and then another secure door, and then a teller behind glass, and then a time-locked vault, right? Those are layers of security, right? And as you progress through those layers, those are the same layers that can exist in your digital world. So when you're learning that, maybe the simplest thing you do is buy a VPN, right? A VPN, it's something you can install on your phone, it's something you can install on your laptop, and they have made it, and they being developers, right? The developers out there making these systems easier, more accessible, cheaper to use. Step one is, what is this VPN? How do I use it? And then you can go from there.
That's a challenge as well, though, because this is a little bit old data, but I did a deep dive on this at one point several months ago, and of the AV products on the Google Play Store, over 300
what is
of
AV?
them.
What is AV?
Antivirus.
Thank you.
Products on the Google Play Store, over 300 of them were actually malware, right? And how is someone supposed to know which one they're to download? Or which VPN is actually just selling their information? Or the fact that all of the information streaming between them and their ISP is being monitored and sold, right? So how many people know about safing? We need to get Safing.io out there and things along that line as well. But this needs to be normalized. My favorite philosopher used to say, if you have to ask what would Jesus do, it's too late. And that's what I mean by making this stuff habitual or instinctual. You guys have all seen, where somebody tries to disarm an opponent. And there's been multiple cases, I'm sure both of you know about this, where in real life, somebody disarms the mugger and then hands them back the gun because they practice handing it back over and over and over again, right? So we've got to make this normative and habitual.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, drilling it, consistency is a thing, right? When you're learning something, repetitions is something, you know, in military training all the time. You do the same things over and over and over again to learn, reading the same things over and over and over again. But then more importantly, to your point, how do you learn these things? You know, if only there was this global movement of individuals that were pretty tech savvy that could go out into their local communities and teach people. I mean, that's what one potential of Bitcoiners is, right? You want to hold on to your keys. What are they called? Private keys, right? So you need to understand what privacy is. It is a fundamental aspect of Bitcoin and how Bitcoin operates, right? So just learning the basics of what that is, and more importantly, if you are an educator, if you're a savvy individual like ourselves, getting out there in the community and getting face-to-face with somebody to help them through their journey, because it is a journey.
Yeah, and this is a strategy I use myself, but if you're like talking to someone that's new to Bitcoin and their concern is, I'm not sure if that system is secure, you can like probably compare it to the fiat system and point out how the fiat system's way less secure than the Bitcoin network, right? And then, but you can also kind of add a little element to that, like it's so secure in fact that if you lose your private keys or your seed phrase, you're not getting it back. You know, if you don't take the right steps, you're not getting it back. It's that secure. If someone, you know, when you're talking about seed phrases and teaching them about seed phrases, then you kind of add in that little step like, what if you gave me your seed phrase? What could I do with it? And is there anything you can do about it? And kind of reiterate the steps that they can do and that they need to do to secure those seed phrases, those private keys, and then explore those ideas of what happens if that gets compromised. Because every week I hear stories about people giving their seed phrases out, loading their private keys into wallet software that's corrupted, that's malicious. If you're trying to convince someone you need to buy cold storage and take custody of your funds, and then they buy a device on Amazon, right? And they don't, and it's a corrupted device, or they're not buying from the source, or so you can give them steps like buy from the source. When you get that product, make sure it's still wrapped and secured. Make sure you follow the instructions that are included with that device, right? Those kind of like basic security techniques and steps to help protect them. Those are like some strategies. Do you guys have any things that come to mind when you're trying to educate folks?
Yeah. For me, a lot of the time is don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? You know, taking the first step to actually get started, because that's the biggest thing on any sort of journey into anything new, right? Is the apprehension to start something new, because we are scared to death of change for some reason. And so starting something new, especially something as serious as your digital privacy in the context of this new internet money that we're all using, that's a big hurdle to get over. So, you know, having grace and being kind and understanding and knowing that person that you're talking to is figuring out where they're coming from. And I really like that you pose the question to them. Hey, what do you think would happen if I took your seed phrase, right? What could I do with that, right? Posing things as questions often leads to the gears churning inside the mind to help get people rolling, to come to their own conclusions, and then ideally that becomes a discussion, right? So what kind of questions would you ask to maybe form some habits in somebody, Nathan?
Well, before I jump onto that, I want to say that I think it's really important that we approach this via cadres or families or small groups where people are able to approach this together. If you go it on your own, you're liable to make a mistake. I was telling you about teaching that high school group of high schoolers cybersecurity, and it was the class on fractional reserve that turned the tide. And they're like, you got to be kidding me. So several of them came back and said, we're putting all of our summer earnings in Bitcoin this year. And they put them in a particular wallet. And then they just recently came back to me and said, hey, they want us to start paying a subscription now. Well, for 15-year-olds, that's a big deal, right? And it's not wrong on the part of the people that are doing it. They have to make a living and have a company as well. But how do we deal with things like that as well. I don't want them to go figure out how to use Nunchuck on their own. They don't want to spend money on Casa or Unchained, which are great solutions, but they're teenagers, right? So what kind of option do we have? And maybe as a family or as a cadre or as a class, you can develop. FETI has a lot of potential. We have to be careful because clearly there are vulnerabilities there, but I think it's the way forward that we start thinking about public-private keys in Bitcoin and Nostr as the popularization of cryptography. And we also need to think about what the problems are with people who, for example, log into everything with Apple or everything with Facebook. And we don't want to find ourselves in that situation 3 years down the road where they've logged into everything under the sun with their Nostr private key, and then it gets exposed, and now they have a big problem, right? So we should learn from the last 20 years of what we've been doing in cybersecurity and make some plans to try to avoid that moving forward.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point with, there's a cryptographic revolution going on, right? And that's why privacy and security are so important. Because when you boil, and this as the dev, when you boil everything down in Bitcoin and Nostr and all these cryptographic everything, it comes down to key management. It comes down to holding your private keys. Right? And so fundamentally, that is like the piece that enables you to do all of these things on top of Bitcoin, whether it's Lightning, Base Chain, eCash, the little lock icon when you're on your banking website, right? Because you're trying to withdraw all your fiat to convert it to Bitcoin. That is using cryptography. That is using cryptographic keys to do that. And understanding the basic fundamentals of what does it mean to have a private key and the relationships thereof. That's a great starting point. And if most people can grasp that, I think you can build the layers up to all these other protocols as well.
But let's also be honest and acknowledge that as great as they are, Alby and NSEC Bunker don't hold a candle to Bitwarden or 1Password in terms of the usability of the everyday individual.
Yeah, and the usability has gotten better. If you are an OG Bitcoiner in the room, you may have been using the command line, the terminal, right? The little blinking green screen to do your Bitcoin transactions, right? But now I can pull out my phone and download an app. Mutiny Wallet is one great example of a self-custodial Lightning wallet that leverages, you're holding your keys on your device. You have that seed phrase that you're backing up. And so the tools are getting better, right? We're 16-ish years into this experiment called Bitcoin, and the tools are rapidly accelerating. The technological revolution is underway. What kind of mistakes do you often see when people new to learning about privacy or security or concerns?
Well, if I could go back to the question you asked about a habit real quickly. So let's say that, and I'm just going to use passwords as an example because, believe it or not, it's still a massive problem. In every room with normies, every single time I get 99.9% of the people saying that they've reused a password more than one time, right? And once I convince them that they have more than 30 of them, or more than 30 accounts, which doesn't take long, then they start to feel overwhelmed. So what I tell them is, look, do not try to set up a password manager one Saturday because there will always be a piano recital or a baseball game or something that you'd rather do. So instead, set yourself a calendar reminder every Monday morning at 8:15 or whatever works for you, and just do 3 accounts every week, because that's how security works. It's a journey that you're on, not a destination you arrive at. And so every week you are 3 layers more secure than you were the week before. And that's the kind of thing that can actually cause transformation in people's lives.
Yeah, beautiful, actionable things that people can do, right? Like that's when you want to teach somebody, just like Tim and Danny up there, learning by doing, right? Having the consistency to do these steps, take the action to do it. And we as Bitcoiners, I think, have an opportunity to provide the forum to teach people, the platform to teach people.
Yeah, so something you said earlier was don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Did I say that right? You've heard it. So what I've seen a lot is you're trying to orange pill someone, you're trying to educate someone on Bitcoin, and you're trying to get them set up in self-custody from the get-go. and you're like you are probably more focused on privacy than they are. And you might even be scaring them a little bit. I actually recommend generally, I think that might be a mistake sometimes. It depends on the audience, but it's a lot easier usually to show someone how Bitcoin works and to get them onboarded initially by using like Wallet of Satoshi before they, blacklisted Americans, but thanks Department of Treasury. But using like really easy to use tools that might not have all the privacy aspects where you can like do UTXO selection and labeling UTXOs, right? Like that might be too much when you're initially orange pilling. So getting them on, custodial wallets makes sense in certain contexts. If you're doing the self-custody apps, which you mentioned, there's a really good ones like Phoenix, Aqua, Mutiny, Blue Wallet, right? There's a bunch of like Bitcoin and Lightning Network and Liquid wallets out there that are self-custodial. But then you're like, you really wanted to send them some sats, and you're like thinking, man, if it's self-custodial, like that's a channel opening. I'm gonna have to spend a lot of sats. That fucking sucks. Like it's a lot cooler if you can just send like 10 sats or 1,000 sats or something.
Or you send a few 100,000 sats to your mechanic neighbor, and you tell him to do the backup, and he doesn't do it because you didn't watch him do it, and then you go back 6 months later when the number goes up, and you go, hey man, you still got those sats? And he's like, oh no, I got a new phone. I'm like, you wrote down the backup code, right? No. So I say that to hold somebody's hand, right? If you have that opportunity, especially if they're in your immediate bubble, right? Like in your neighborhood, your neighbors, your community, your church, whatever it is, go hold their hand for the first time and make sure they do it the right way, right? I could have prevented that by just watching, go write this down right now. Don't come back until you're done, and then I'll send you the sats, right? Until you've gone through the repetitions, I will hold some Bitcoin for you, and I do have some earmarked for him, but, making it a requirement for them to show the proof of work, it put forward like, hey, I got that VPN I installed that you told me to install. Show me how it works now, right? Take the 10 minutes out of your day to show them how that works. Hold their hand through it, and understand, too, that trade-offs are everywhere, right? It's always a trade-off. My mother, custodial account. Sorry, Mom. We'll get you to self-custody when you have a meaningful amount of Bitcoin.
There's time. She can study. She can do it right. Before you know it, she's like a mixing fanatic wearing a Guy Fawkes mask. And she's like, dunking on the ATF on Twitter. Like,
I think we have to be incrementalist. Otherwise, we lose people along the way, right? If you're 17, 19, 21, and you've lost $2,500 because you made an error, you're not going to try again for a long time, right? So move them in the right direction in small steps.
Privacy is like a thing that we're always focused on. Usually, as Bitcoiners, the more hardcore you get, the more like concerned you usually are. So take advantage of the lack of privacy sometimes when you're educating, though. So like an example, I may have paid someone a significant amount of Bitcoin for a contract work recently. And so I sent them on-chain Bitcoin to an address with Mutiny Wallet, had them explain the seed phrase, right, and all that security aspect, and I sent them the coin. And then you can send them like the transaction ID right away. And so I actually walked through through the whole process of the Bitcoin network with him live. So I'm like, okay, boom, we just broadcasted this. It's around the world, man, in 3 seconds. Talk about what's physically occurring or digitally occurring, right? It's like, look at that, mempool.space transaction. You show it to them. It's like, see how it says unconfirmed? It's sitting in the mempools, man. The miners are picking it up, and for you, I prioritize that thing for you, right? And it should be in the next block. You can talk about the blocks, and you can show them all these transactions, show them the mempool. Mempool.space is my favorite visual representation of the blockchain, but show them the blockchain, and they'd be like, this is your address, this is my address, and if you're really clever, use use Strike to send it or something, like a custodial service, and then if they're newbies, they'll be like, how much Bitcoin does that guy have? And they don't realize it Strike's hot wallet. But you're like, fuck, that guy's maybe that's not good, but maybe it's cool, right? I don't know. But you can use that to your advantage, right? Show the transparency of the blockchain. Use that to your advantage when you're orange pilling. And it's a little bit easier, in my opinion, to go from like fiat world to the blockchain Bitcoin world because you can actually see it and it makes sense, right? And you can, you're asking them to trust this network, and it is useful it is transparent to a certain point. And then another reminder, if they're like an American using the fiat financial system, you don't have financial privacy right now. So like, get that, you can, the banks can see your transactions, and anyone with subpoena power can see those transactions. So you're already compromised on your privacy, most likely, unless you're like a weird cash guy. So just something to keep in mind. So
but you're used to
let
it.
them worry about privacy later is my advice if you're like really trying to orange pill and onboard someone. You were saying?
I was just going to say that most people are used to that lack of privacy, and it no longer bothers them, which is a bummer, but it's the reality.
And that's where I think, showing them the mempool when you send that transaction and they can see a potential wallet balance from where this thing's coming from, that draws a click. Again, showing people what they're exposing, right? Hey, if you do a transaction on chain, this is linked to your name because you have an account with this KYC service, right? That name is now linked to that transaction, and here's how you can follow the transactions throughout the history of the UTXO set. You can see the whole public ledger, and that in and of itself might be just showing them what they are exposing. It might be enough to kind of make something click for them and saying, well, hey, this is why you don't reuse the same address, right? If you receive 1 million sats to this address and this address and this address, if I find one of your addresses, I only see that you have 1 million sats, right? If I'm your employer and I'm paying you, you don't want to receive to the same address over and over again. Do you want your employer to know where your money's going? No. You want to be private. If you're a corporate business, you maybe have some more public things. But if you're not, if you're a small business or something like that, you don't want your customers seeing how much funds you have in your account, right? So that's why these mechanisms for privacy on the Bitcoin network are really paramount to a well-functioning society.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we notice so many things that seem to be parallel to Bitcoin. Oh, you're a Bitcoiner, you must also be carnivore. Oh, you're a Bitcoiner, you must also avoid seed oils. And because this is about competence, about recovery of self-reliance. And I think we should project forward a little bit. And I want to say something that I think there's a whole lot of room to make adjustment on. But if you'll grant me the space to say sort of, kind of, I think we can anticipate that Bitcoin will function like the base layer of money today, and the Lightning Network will be sort of like the ACH network tomorrow, and eCash in some way, shape, or form will be where people actually transact. And the reason why that's important is because a year and a half or whenever that was that the price dropped out of Bitcoin again, I was out of any more dry powder and I had no more budget space. So I went and got a job at a gas station 3 nights a week so that I could go straight to Bitcoin. And that was massively, massively eye-opening because of I work in a white-collar world on a day-to-day basis. And suddenly I was working with a lady who said, yeah, last week my husband chained me to the shower for 6 hours and left me there, right? And so that and all kinds of other crazy stories. They're not ready to learn what money is, let alone how the mempool works. So how are we going to be able to get them into a world where privacy is normal? And we're going to have to do these other things that attend to life itself, like operating systems that are not being surveilled just by utilizing them. So open source and decentralization and the normalization of these concepts is essential, not just about our money, but they're all going to be satellites that spin off of an objectively true money.
Yeah, and the privacy by default, right? And that goes to, even if you're not a super technical Bitcoin wizard or developer or anything like that, our purchasing power as Bitcoiners, our ability to deploy capital is ever increasing over time. And so being aware of these trade-offs and these initiatives and where things are lacking, maybe you can identify projects that you can aid in some way, shape, or form. And the best way of aiding an open source project is use it. If you use the project and file a bug or communicate with the dev or join the community, you can really advance the privacy and security of these projects by saying, hey, I was clicking this button and doing whatever. And the more iterations we get the more we have, whoever using these products giving feedback, the better we can adjust course and course correct and make them private and secure by default. I will say I want to do one plug for a Padawan wallet. If you've got an Android wallet, there's a wallet out there called Padawan Wallet. It uses something called testnet. Now, this might not even be familiar to some Bitcoiners in the room, but testnet is essentially a separate Bitcoin network for testing and developing, right? The coins have they're imaginary internet money, even more than Bitcoin is, right? It's like the real fake internet money. But there's a wallet out there that allows you to interact on-chain, on testnet, with a mobile wallet that's very user-friendly. That's a way to expose kids. It's been used a lot, I think, with educating the youth, right? Because you can give them something, right? I'm considering doing it when my kids are old enough. Give them some testnet Bitcoin, right? Just because I'll give you some. I'm a dev. I got testnet coins. But you can send those to your kid, and now your kid can learn by sending transactions. There's a mempool for it, right? So there's a mirror. So there are other ways, and I think we're just going to have some hurdles along the way as we build out the abstractions on top of all this stuff to make it normal, make it habitual.
Yeah, and we're pretty good on security, but with privacy, the narrative around privacy gets really muddy. So, we're probably, in a lot of the scenarios I'm imagining is, you're talking to, friends and family and, normal humans, but, sometimes some of you might even be talking to, regulators, law enforcement, people that work in finance, where, the narrative is financial privacy is, not a thing. They don't see it as a problem. So when you're doing training, it's okay to, talk about financial privacy and be positive about it, and try to point out how we lack a lot of it now. I think that's it's important to continue that narrative that we need financial privacy, and then when we have developers developing projects in Bitcoin, building a lot of privacy tools into those projects, into those tools. So if you have a wallet, let's include some pay join implementation. Let's add a lot of go less on trackers, be open source. If you can, don't have a sign up, don't have a KYC, don't force a phone number or an email use, don't log things more than you have to for engineering purposes or whatever, or troubleshooting.
And one of the big things on these projects is there's this concept of an anonymity set within privacy where it's kind of like blending in with the crowd. And this is applicable in Bitcoin as well, right? If you're the only person using some whiz-bang privacy coin, whatever, you might stick out like a sore thumb. So again, even if you are just a regular user of these and you appreciate preserving your financial privacy, go use these tools, because there might be somebody out there in the world that their life and their families' lives and their communities' lives are dependent on this privacy-preserving aspect. And being another factor, another data point in that anonymity set, the bigger that anonymity set is, the more privacy you can gain by being part of it. That's a big deal. And that can literally be life or death for some people using Bitcoin across the world.
But we need innovations like purchasing cooperatives and people that begin to function as a corporation, because we have people, my best friend's daughter just got scammed on Facebook Marketplace yesterday. She's not going to not get scammed if she tries to use BISC, right? So we're going to have to innovate before we get to those type of solutions. Or I'm sure you all have heard the story about the housekeeper in El Salvador that got paid from Wasabi Wallet, and then Chivo Wallet wouldn't accept the money, right? Well, the housekeeper is the last person you want being in that situation.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I think we're close to time here. And so we'll move to some closing remarks, and then we'll hand it over, I believe, to Gabe is going to close us out here. So Travis, any closing remarks, thoughts?
If you're trying to orange pill, keep it simple. The privacy rabbit hole, the privacy part of this Bitcoin rabbit hole, it's okay if it's further down the road. There are techniques that you can have these folks use if they end up with in hindsight, oh shoot, all my Bitcoin's KYC'd. There is stuff they can do, right? It's not like they're screwed forever. Use simple tools that help you orange pill. There are definitely a lot of non-custodial options out there, but then you just have, that goes into your consideration if you're trying to like hook them up with free sats or sat amounts. So something to consider. And then again, if it helps onboarding, like don't be afraid of the custodial options, especially if it's like your grandparents. Like let them get hooked up with River, Swan, Strike, and just let them start there, right? And then they can study, and then they can, add the privacy if they care about the privacy later. That's some of my suggestions. And then also really hit hard the security. Don't let them get scammed.
Nate, sorry.
I would leave you with 3 words. Aware, care, prepare. You have to give people information, but a lot of times when we're trying to help people change, we just flood them with info, and that is not helpful. It's just overwhelming. So not only do you need to let them know what's happening in their world, that's the information, but then you also need to tell them why do they personally, and the more personal it can be, why do they care? That becomes their motivation. And then you need to help them start practicing responding with excellence. And that's what it means to be prepared. And so if you can focus on that as an approach, treat people with the science of treat people as we know humans work, then you're able to actually start preparing them to practice privacy and security as a matter of habit.
Yeah. Privacy is a human right. It has been time immemorial. It's been difficult, right? Back alleys, secret handshakes, sealed letters, and everything like that. The real cryptographic revolution is these beautiful mathematical relationships that is cryptography enable us to have perfect privacy in the digital realm. You can encrypt something from my key to yours, and we can have gross assurances that that will not be read by anyone else. You don't need the lady at the gas station to know your name, your email, your phone number when you're handing her $5 to buy a magazine, right? That's not part of that transaction. But guess what? Everybody's getting what they want. I get my magazine, she gets $5. There's no need to know anything else about that. The ability to selectively reveal yourself is privacy, and it's a human right, and I hope you all study it and teach others. Thank you.